Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation for eme6054. This presentation will focus specifically on communications theory. As we continue looking at theories, we'll begin to see how these different theories work together to support instructional technology while having a unique contribution to the field. So let's get started. So now we're turning our attention to communication theory. And communication theory is related to sharing information, to transmitting a message from one party to another. For instructional technologists, this message is often an instructional message. For the message to be transmitted or shared, you need an encoder or a sender of the message. You also need a decoder, or the person who receives the message. So you need the encoder to encode the message and the decoder to decode the message. You also need a means by which the message is conveyed, and this is the transmission channel. Now there are times when the message is muddied in different ways or hindered, and the term we use for those things that can hinder or interfere with the message transmission is noise. And then we also have feedback. Now all of these different parts work together for a common purpose of communication. And the parts are interrelated. A change in one of the components can impact the other parts. So communication is a system. We often use models to explain or depict communication. These models help us visually understand the communication process and what's involved and how the process works. So we're going to look at a couple of models of communication, and I'll walk you through these models so we can see how the parts interact to create an explanation of communication. The first model we're going to look at is the Shannon-Weaver mathematical model of communication. Now this model was first created in 1949, but it's still used today. The Shannon-Weaver model shows you that you begin with a sender who creates a message. And that message is then sent through a transmission channel to the receiver. Now that message can be hindered in some way by noise. And you'll also see that the receiver gives feedback to the sender, which helps the sender know whether or not the receiver received and decoded the message as the sender intended. So we've got these boxes here with the sender pointing to the transmission channel, which is then pointing to the receiver, and noise is in the middle there pointing to the transmission channel, showing that it can have an impact on that channel. And then the arrow going from the receiver back to the sender shows that feedback loop. Now let me give you an example. Let's say I am designing and developing an online instructional module. I'm the sender or encoder, and my message is the instruction that I'm presenting. Let's say this presentation I'm giving now is the message. It includes audio, video or visual, and textual information as part of the message. You're the receiver, and you're going to try to decode my message. Now there may be noise that interferes with your ability to effectively decode my message. Maybe I'm using too many graphics that are distracting. Maybe you have a slow internet connection. Maybe errors keep popping up on your screen. Maybe my accent is difficult to understand. Perhaps the microphone is echoing. So noise can be anything that causes distractions. It can also be things that we may not think about, like being too hot or too cold. So noise keeps me from conveying my message effectively, and it keeps you from receiving and decoding it effectively. With respect to feedback, maybe I use an assessment item or a questioning strategy or a discussion activity to help me determine how effectively I encoded and how effectively you decoded the message. So our communication system, according to the Shannon-Weaver mathematical model, will have an information source, a transmitter or an encoder, a channel by which the message is conveyed, a receiver or decoder, the destination, and noise. This next model is similar to the Shannon-Weaver model, but it adds the idea of frame of reference. Now this model is Schramm's model of communication, and Wilbur Schramm developed it in 1954. This one is a bit modified and is dated 1963, but his original model was developed in 1954. Like the Shannon-Weaver model, Schramm's model includes the sender or encoder, the decoder or the receiver, a message, the transmission, the feedback loop, and noise, but it also adds two circles, one that encircles the sender and the information source, and one that encircles the decoder and the destination. These circles represent the frames of reference for the encoder and decoder. Now, your frame of reference influences how you perceive things, and it impacts how we understand and judge things. A person's frame of reference is unique in that a person includes and has different assumptions. A person has different attitudes and experiences, different beliefs and values and other factors. So a frame of reference is unique to an individual person because these different things, the attitudes, the assumptions, the experiences, beliefs, values, those things are unique to that person. So the encoder's frame of reference influences how and what is decoded, and the decoder's frame of reference influences how and what is decoded. Frames of reference can also play into noise. So Schramm's model includes frames of reference as factors in communication. Where the sender's and receiver's unique frames of reference overlap, Schramm places that signal where the transmission can occur. This means that the message has to fall within that area where the two frames of reference overlap. The message has to fall within the sender's frame of reference or knowledge base and within the receiver's frame of reference or knowledge base. Otherwise, the message may not be effectively communicated. Schramm's addition of frame of reference is important for us as we consider instructional technology, because as the encoders of instructional messages, we have to be aware of our own personal frames of reference and also the frames of reference for those we create instruction for. If we create a message in Spanish for French-speaking learners, we're likely to be considering, to not be considering the learner's frame of reference, and the instructional message will suffer. The link between communication theory and instructional technology is pretty clear. Instruction is a means by which we communicate new knowledge and skills and attitudes from the instructor to the learner. And technology provides us with the tools for encoding and transmitting and decoding messages. When technology isn't used properly, it can also introduce noise to the communication process. It can distort the message, and it can even negatively impact the communication. Now, we create and encode messages intended to facilitate positive changes in knowledge, skills, attitudes, and abilities. And our frames of reference influence those messages. we create instructional messages for learners who will then decode the instructional messages, and their frames of reference influence their interpretations of the messages. So we have to select and often develop transmission channels for the messages to be conveyed to the learners. Those channels can come in many different formats. They may be auditory. They may be print-based. They may be audio-visual or online. So the transmission channels are selected based on what we think will work best to convey our message at that moment to the decoders, in this case the learners. And we can help with message transmission and frame of reference by varying the formats that we use to present information and share examples. And in all of this, we have to minimize and avoid noise. Now, some noise we can control and other noise we can't. But we work to prevent noise, and we work to ensure that that noise will not negatively impact our message. And that's the end of this presentation. Please move on through the rest of the content, and I'll see you online.